Awesome. Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of the MacEwan NDP podcast. So we'll start off by introducing ourselves. My name's Dominic. I'm a political science major going into my third year, and I am the president of this club.
Perfect. And my name is Callan. I am a fourth year political science student at
third year in the program, and I'm the secretary of the group.
Great. Here, Aiden, you introduce yourself.
My name is Aiden Tiro. I'm the VP of social media. I keep forgetting what my title is of the club. And I was also a candidate in the 2019 federal election for the NDP. Got my little button here. And yeah, excited to be doing this.
Nice. Okay, Cal, you give it a shot.
Perfect. My name is Callan. I am a member of the MacEwan NDP club, fourth year political science major at MacEwan University.
Tom?
I'm Thomas Klein, Vice President of the MacEwan NDP. I am a second year political sciences and English major.
Awesome. Okay, before we get started, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we're on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous people like the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. Right, so we're going to start with our first topic for today is reopening the economy. So a bit of context is, on May 4th, the first stage of Alberta's economic reopening after the coronavirus pandemic began. This stage allowed Albertans to go for non-urgent surgeries, use some provincial park services, and go golfing, among some other things. The official stage 1 began on May 14th, allowing some retail stores, restaurants, and daycares to open up. However, large gatherings are still banned until stage 3, which along with stage 2 has no set for beginning yet. As it stands, Alberta has 355 active cases of COVID-19, 6,698 recovered patients, and 149 deaths. While cases are still occurring, some from gatherings where social distancing protocols weren't followed, we're seeing considerably fewer cases per day than we did at the height of this pandemic. So far, we seem to be doing well, but we need to keep in mind that we're still early on in this, so a second, deadlier wave is still highly possible. Additionally, another political factor we're seeing is that the UCP Premier, Jason Kenney's approval ratings are among the lowest of any premier in Canada right now, which is contrary to what we're seeing usually. We're seeing a lot of leaders' ratings skyrocketing in the face of this pandemic. And some explanations for this could be due to his government's ill-timed attacks on doctors and the incident where Health Minister Tyler Shandro went down to the driveway of a local physician and yelled at the physician and his family, as well as Mr. Kenney's austerity budgets that have made life more expensive and put people at risk. So the question I'm going to pose for everybody is, do you think Alberta has rushed into reopening the economy, and to what extent has Premier Kenney handled the crisis successfully or unsuccessfully? Aiden?
Oh, well, so, all things considered, as you said, the numbers, we are starting to see a reduction, at least in this first wave of cases. With what's currently going on with the current lockdown. But as we go to reopen, there has been a bit of confusion when it comes to daycare centers, when it comes to proper regulations for restaurants. So I think there's a little bit of frustration there. I also do think the government, we need to be looking forward to what happens after this pandemic ends. So we are looking at a potential exodus of rural healthcare professionals, specifically physicians. And so, what's the government's plan for that in response to their austerity budget when it comes to healthcare, which look, the reality is they were laying off and cutting well into this pandemic, well into this first wave. And I think although I do give the UCP certain props for the way they've handled the pandemic, the way they've enforced certain restrictions, I do think that the overall approach to healthcare has really hurt his approval ratings in this, and I think people are starting to feel the effects of that now more so than ever. I read somewhere that Rachel Notley, 58% of the province believes Rachel Notley would have done a better job had she been premier of handling this pandemic, and I happen to agree with that.
Yeah, that's a sentiment I've heard too. I recall at the beginning of this crisis, I saw I saw a poll that said that most Albertans would have preferred that Notley was in power rather than Kenny. So that shows that Albertans trust the NDP with healthcare, which is a potential advantage to us going into the next election. And in terms of how Kenny's handled it, then I agree that like we can give him some credit. He's managed it surprisingly well compared to how he's managed other things, in my opinion at least. But at the same time, the picking a fight with doctors and causing a potential crisis in rural healthcare and the Tyler Shandro incident have definitely put a damper on it. So I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think too, and as far as looking at the Tyler Shandro incident, I think had Kenny taken an approach of saying, this is unacceptable, we need to switch around the cabinet here, get somebody who is frankly better temperamentally suited for office, and preferably someone without a potential conflict of interest, as far as when it comes to privatizing our healthcare. But I think. I do give this government some credit, but we need to see, even beyond this pandemic, a change in their approach to our healthcare, because this privatization agenda is just not working.
Great. Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, the approach is definitely somewhat flawed, I think, and I think that Shandro resigning was the right move to do, personally, or that's what I believe.
Yeah.
Great. So, what's in the chat again? Time's up.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, Layla, you're up next. So my question is, do you think that Alberta has rushed into reopening the economy, and to what extent has the UCP government handled this successfully or unsuccessfully?
What do I think? I think that Alberta has not rushed into reopening the economy, and I'm going to speak upon kind of the economic side of things, but I think that we were in a recession before this whole COVID-19 began, and I think that before then we were in a recession. I think now we're kind of below being in worse than being in a recession. So I think we're kind of like below the belt as what I'm trying to get at. And I think we're in an economic disaster. And I think that as we progress on forward with COVID-19 further, I think it's going to be worse and worse and worse. But I don't think it was rushed. I think the fact that they're kind of reopening everything slowly is kind of a positive note. Because people want to get out there and they want to go to stores, they want to go see things, they want everything to be back to normal. Do I think that Premier Kenny has handled the crisis successfully or unsuccessfully? I think both. I think I'm like half and half. So I think he handled it successfully and unsuccessfully, because with everything that's going on, I see that everyone's not very happy with how everything has turned out. I know that for the safety of Canada and all its citizens, that people need to take precautions and practice good hygiene and all that stuff. But I think that we should continue that even after coming out of the pandemic, and we should be practicing that daily on a day-to-day basis, aside from this whole COVID-19 pandemic. Whether it came or did not come, we should always be practicing good hygiene, just in general.
And sorry, just a time check. We are at the 2 minutes. If you just want to give kind of the final thoughts. Also, just so everybody knows, I've got Layla on the speakerphone here.
Okay, great.
I was going to cut it there.
Yeah. Oh, okay, sounds good. Sorry.
Okay, right. Well, yeah, definitely some good points raised there. Like, I was personally on the side of believing that we were reopening too early, though from what I've seen, I think I may be being proven wrong. And I mean, I've seen a few articles saying that Alberta and Saskatchewan and the prairie provinces have waited too long to reopen, while Ontario and Quebec have opened early. So it's interesting to see that perspective, because obviously Ontario and Quebec are the epicenter of this crisis, and we've been doing considerably well considering like our demographics and the size of the province effectively. And so, I mean, getting the economy going is somewhat important, though I think that we'll need to kind of make sure that we prioritize human life over the growth of the economy, which is something that I'm not entirely sure that this current government will do, because they're all talking about economic growth and stuff. And I mean, it's proven that like some austerity economic policies can have negative consequences on humans' quality of life and their employment status and that sort of thing. So there's definitely that to continue to consider. Though, I mean, so far so good. It's smooth sailing, though we've got to consider that we're quite early on at the same time. And I would also agree that Kenny has both handled this well and handled it badly, because, I mean, evidently we've been able to get cases down, and due to, in large part, in my opinion, his collaboration and general ability to listen to Dr. Dina Hinshaw, our chief medical officer. But at the same time, the whole fight with doctors and I'm not sure exactly how to define it. There was some sort of pricing issue with payment for doctors, I believe. So rural Alberta is seeing an exodus of doctors. So it's a multifaceted approach, effectively. Great. So how are we doing for time? Great. Okay, I'll ask Cal next. What do you think of this?
All right. So I do have, I want to approach this question from a little bit of a different angle. Now, we are at the later stages of the first wave of the pandemic, and I'm really hoping that there's going to be an extensive post-analysis on how we've handled everything, on the federal side, on the provincial side, even on the municipal side, so we can have some take-backs. Now, I do believe that a lot of our governments have come together, unlike we have seen in recent history. That being said, I don't think Kenny and the UCP have done a very good job handling the pandemic. Now, on the health side, I do attribute a lot of that to Dr. Dina Hinshaw. She's been a great leader. She's been fantastic, keeping those daily briefings for Alberta, keeping Albertans in the know. Kenny, on the other hand, and the UCP, I think their big decisions have been mostly failures. And I look at the outbreak at the Cargill meatpacking plant and JBS. I look at the outbreaks that happened in Calgary, in the long-term care home. For that, I feel like the UCP government were non-existent. They just weren't available. So I look at those kind of things. And when it comes to the relaunch and the reopening, I do feel like it's the timing is okay, given everything that's gone on with our cases here in Alberta, which have been gone very good. And kudos to the Albertans and everyone working together. But there's a lot of confusion. There was a lot of confusion with the first phase, Calgary not opening up right away, and Kenny letting us know the night before, really pulling the rug under those businesses. And we have to make a point of the lack of support for our small businesses here in Alberta and the lack of support for individual Albertans. Kenny has just left it up to the federal government to support us. I feel like the province could have done quite a lot more, and I hope when this is all said and done, we can have a good post-analysis on everything that's happened.
That's a good focus too, the post-analysis aspect. That's something I hadn't really considered myself, so I feel like they'll need to get a panel together to examine this, potentially. I mean, obviously we know that Mr. Kenny likes to appoint his conservative cronies to these boards, so of course this board would, examining the response to the pandemic, would have to be nonpartisan and contain people from various different walks of life. But I think that a post-analysis is a good idea, considering it's very likely this will happen again. And I mean, who knows, maybe in 40 years there's another virus like this that puts us in the exact same situation. So, I mean, being able to learn from our mistakes and being able to build on our successes is definitely something that we should be doing after this. And I really hope the provincial government puts this in place and puts the right people in charge to talk about this. And economic reopening, I definitely agree. Though I feel like Albertans' businesses were already struggling at this point. Like, we were already doing very bad we were doing badly in terms of like being able to find jobs and employment. And I mean, Kenny's policies have killed tens of thousands of jobs in this province. So even more Albertans were unemployed than could have been. And I mean, CERB is nice, though. We know that we can't rely on it forever. And I think our economy needs to be better prepared to get back in business and have a focus on everything. I mean, we know that this government prioritizes the oil industry over everything else. And while I think some emphasis on that can be beneficial, we need to focus on diversification, getting everything going, and even building new industries from scratch effectively, just having a lot of resources and finding new jobs for people, effectively reconstructing the province after this goes on.
Yes, big diversification. Yes, we
Yes,
need diversification.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we've talked about quite a bit. How are we doing on time? Great. Okay, Tom, last but definitely not least, what's your opinion on how Kenny has handled this and whether or not we've reopened the economy too early or too late?
I might be being too critical of the statistics, but like on June 4th, there was 50 new cases, and on June 5th, there was 7 new cases, and then all of a sudden on June 6th, there was 40 new cases, and during the last 48 hours, it's been 64 new cases, which it means the virus is still spreading, and it means that there's going to be more people in the hospital because the virus is still spreading. So I don't know if we reopen the economy too early, or if we opened it correct, or if we opened it at the same time. But obviously, we are not doing something correctly, because I might be being too critical of the statistics, but it seems to be increasing for the last 3 days. And especially with Jason Kenney first canceling the Edmonton Super Lab and cutting funding to the AHS, not testing early enough, starting more with doctors, and being jealous of Dr. Hinshaw.
Oh, yes, of course. That's definitely something to point out.
I just have zero vertical trust in Jason Kenney, especially because he doesn't have a science background, unlike leaders such as Angela Merkel.
Yes, exactly. That's a good concern to bring up, too, I think.
So, and with the lack of guidelines given, like I could be being too critical of the statistics. However, it seems that we either open too early or we do not have the proper guidelines, or both.
Interesting. I would respond by saying that I think to some extent, I even heard Dr. Hinshaw say this in an Edmonton Journal article, that it's expected that cases will go up slightly with reopening. So at the same time, you have to consider the merit of that. Like, you have to some extent, I feel like there's some herd immunity ideology in there. And to what extent I agree with that, I'm really not sure of.
Yeah,
and I mean, obviously, cases have been a bit inconsistent, of course, because we saw 50 cases one day, then 7 the next day, as you said, correct? And then there's been
no, it was 15.
Okay, 50 to 15, right? So yeah, we've seen things go up and down a bit. So
it was 15 to 7.
Okay, right, yeah. So we've been seeing things haven't exactly been consistent the past few days, and of course we have to consider that we're quite early on with this. So once we have a bit more data, then we might be able to make a better conclusion. Though I think it's a valid point to bring that up, and especially the cancellation of the super lab. This could have potentially helped us quite a bit. We could have developed better techniques with the super lab. We could have analyzed COVID-19, and I mean, following our logic to the end of its extent, then potentially we could have been able to develop a vaccine or isolate a vaccine or find something like that. Obviously, I'm going a little far with that, but potentially the super lab could have helped out a lot. So I definitely criticize the current government's decision to scrap the Edmonton Super Lab, which could have been life-saving in this pandemic, honestly.
So just want to say from a just tech thing. So I'm getting a message. It looks like Zoom is limiting it to just 40 minutes. I think for the next one, I might just get an upgraded account and just post it like that.
You're sure?
But
okay,
yeah.
If you're okay with doing that, then that works out.
Yeah, but I'm thinking for this one, so it's saying we have we have 5 minutes and 30 seconds left. Do we want to maybe cut this as part 1, where we talked about topic 1, and then just jump into so create a new meeting and then just jump into that for our second part and put it together and make it one podcast?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Okay, that works for me. I mean, I think we've said a lot of relevant things about the first topic, and we can build on this for the second topic as well, right? So, I mean, like, we've definitely got a good foundation, but we've got potential to do so, and hopefully Layla will be able to log on for next time, so we'll be able to work things a bit better.
Yeah. Do we want to just jump straight into, like, just I'll create a new meeting now, and we'll just jump straight into that, and we'll just do kind of two-parter for one episode?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. If you guys want to, then yeah, that works.
Everybody's good. All right, so I do have about 4.5 minutes left on the timer. If anybody wants any final thoughts, final words.
Okay, yeah, let's wrap up the time here so we can keep on subject. Tom, I love how you brought up the super lab and talk about the doctors. I know Aiden and Dominic were talking about that as well. I think another thing that this whole pandemic has exposed is the importance of epistemic communities and experts. So like we've seen Dr. Hinshaw, we've seen the chief medical officers of every single province, and the Dr. Tam on the federal side, like they've become celebrities, and rightfully so, because they're the experts, that they're the people that we should be listening to. I look at the super lab, like why isn't Kenny supporting the super lab right now? Why shouldn't we be rushing that through? And I'm really hoping that we could take a look at what the experts have said throughout this crisis and apply that as policy moving forward.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to look at through that. I think that with Dr. Hinshaw's new status as someone who most people didn't really know about, from being elevated to kind of a local celebrity, is something that's pretty interesting. Though at the same time, I feel like Jason Kenney has tried to take attention from her, at least in some cases, though fortunately it hasn't been as extensive as it potentially could have been, so we've been lucky on that front.
Does anybody else want to jump in? Some final thoughts on the relaunch?
I think I'm pretty good for now. What do you guys think?
Well, Jason Kenney saying that we shouldn't care about senior citizens because the average age of Albertans is 83. So
oh yes, absolutely.
Parents.
That's pretty problematic, definitely. I think that was a statement that gained the UCP some notoriety, and just, I mean, they have a record of saying things that are irresponsible, impulsive, and make them sound, frankly, just unpleasant. So, I mean, that's not out of character for them, of course.
Mm-hmm. It's completely tone deaf, and whether or not the context, what the context was, it was completely wrong and completely insensitive. Like, we've had so many deaths in our long-term care homes, so many deaths of our seniors because of this pandemic, and to excuse this as a simple influenza because the average death was 83, which is a year older than the life expectancy. If I were one of those people whose elders had passed away, I'd be offended.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, this is definitely something that was completely inappropriate to say. I mean, we've had seniors' residences in Calgary have been so badly hidden by this that it's absolutely tone deaf for the premier to say such a thing, I personally think. Okay, do we want to wrap up and start the next one now?
I'm getting less than a minute. I was just trying to upgrade real quick, but it looks like we may have to...
Yeah, it's okay. Don't worry about it. We can just start another meeting.
We can start another meeting.
So go ahead and book one right now. All right, talk to you guys in 1 or 2 minutes.
Great, thanks.